Welcome to Torah Today Ministries and our continuing series called Parsing the Portion. My name is Grant Luton.
And I'm Robin.
And we're here to discuss Torah portion Noach, or as you may know it as Noah. It begins in Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, and goes all the way to the end of chapter 11. So Robin doesn't know I'm going to do this, but last night we were sitting in the living room and she made something that really made me think. You said something about how as children we hear the story of Noah so often that it almost becomes cartoonish in our minds. How did you put that? Do you remember?
Well, I said when I was a little girl, there was a nursery rhyme, The Old Woman Who Lived in a Shoe, and it was a ridiculous image that we enjoyed as kids. And Noah's Ark has become almost as fableized as that story to many of us. Because let's face it, it's hard to believe that the world was flooded and God called a man to build a boat. It just sounds a little bit like a fable.
Yeah. And it's such a favorite Bible story among children that even as adults, we still think of it as a children's story, when it is anything but. If you really made an accurate movie of this story, you would not be showing it to children. It would be PG for sure.
So it wouldn't have cute little giraffe heads sticking out the top of the ark?
No, not at all. You know, I've never seen yet a child's play set or a child's painting for their room of Noah's Ark that showed all the dead bodies floating around the boat. But this is quite a story. Now, one of the things that a lot of people say, and I know I've said it until finally it occurred to me that wasn't quite true, we always want to say that God destroyed the world by a flood, but nowhere in the Bible does it say that. Now, I think it's over in Peter. I should have looked up the reference where a translation will say he destroyed the earth through a flood, but the word that's used there is really destroyed the culture, the age, with a flood. Mm-hmm. What the scripture tells us is that God destroyed all flesh by a flood. The earth was spared. It was washed clean. And you can see this a number of times, about 4 times in the portion. In chapter 6, verse 17 says, "And as for me, behold, I am going to bring the floodwaters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which there is a breath of life," not to destroy the earth. And then you go down to chapter 7, verse 23. And again, God says, "And he blotted out all existence that was on the face of the ground, from man to animals to creeping things to the birds of the heavens." So again, he did not destroy the earth. He destroyed the living things on the earth. Chapter 8, verse 21. Adonai smelled the pleasing aroma, and Adonai said in his heart, "I will not continue to profane again the ground because of man, when the imagery of man's heart is evil from his youth. Nor will I again continue to smite every living being as I have done." And then finally in chapter 9, verse 11, it says, "And I will confirm my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood." So what we see here is we see the people, the flesh, the animals and people destroyed, but the earth preserved. But in the future, there's going to be a fiery destruction in which the people are preserved, but the earth is destroyed and replaced. And so there's something going on here about water and fire, because both are cleansing agents in the scriptures. And so we see a cleansing of the earth in the story of the flood. But then we see a cleansing, I believe, of the people, because they make it through the fire, but the earth does not in the future. And then there's a new heavens and a new earth. So just a little something for you to ponder and think about. And so anyhow, I just wanted to make sure we laid that bit of foundation for this Torah portion.
Well, it reminds me of our conversation we had in our Sabbath gathering this last Saturday when we were going through Psalm 145, and verse 20 says, "The Lord keeps all who love him, but all the wicked he will destroy." But the word wicked really should say wickedness.
All wickedness, yes.
So it's the wickedness he wants to destroy. He wants to preserve the souls of his creation. But it doesn't appear that way, Grant, honestly, in this story. So I have to trust that there's something, as with every single word, he's trying to show us about himself.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can dig down a little bit
Yeah.
and discover some of that.
Well, I'm reminded of that kids game called Hot Potato, and I think it has different versions under different names, but basically you have an object and you're in a circle with other people. You keep past the object as fast as you can, because when the music stops or when the timer buzzes, whoever's holding it, this hot potato is out.
Right.
It's like a bomb and they're gone. Well, the truth of it is we all have a hot potato, and God has told us that it's going to go off. Now, all you have to do is throw the potato away, throw the bomb away. But if you continue to embrace this dangerous thing, then when it is destroyed, well, we die with it. And so God says to repent, let go of your sin, turn away from it. Holding on to your sin is like a drowning man holding on to a boulder as if it's a flotation device. And all it's going to do is pull him down. Let go of it. Let it sink away. And then we can then come back up into the air and into the light. So it's a matter of letting go of those things that are destructive in our lives.
Well, that's one of the things that has occurred to me recently after so many cycles of reading through the Torah. This story, I always kind of got embarrassed for God when I would read it and think I had to figure out a way to defend him because he seemed so harsh. But as I read it these days, the very opposite thing comes to the surface for me. And I see grace and rest and salvation and mercy.
Yes.
And all those themes are really starting to come through.
Yes.
So those are the themes I want to talk about this morning.
Right.
Because they're starting to really be evident, which is amazing to me.
Well, go ahead and talk about rest. I know that's been a theme for you.
It has been a theme for me, probably because I've been seeking it so wholeheartedly in my life, because you look around and it feels at times, at the sake of sounding like I'm exaggerating, but I have a feeling you and I aren't the only ones sensing this, that it's almost like in the days of Noah out there. Everybody is just sort of what is called wrong, they're calling right. What's right is wrong. Everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. It's crazy.
It is.
And I know that you touched on the genealogy that were given in the 5th chapter of Genesis when you were doing your Parsha seasonings. And I'm not going to reiterate all that, but it's so amazing that when you start with Adam and you go down through the genealogy, you land on Noah's name. And it means rest.
Yes.
So the question is, why? Why does Noah's name mean rest? And what does rest have to do with the story? But if we think about it, God had to deal with the wickedness. But he gave a safe place for Noah to take his family and find rest. But he had to enter it. He had to build it. He had to trust. He had to enter it. And it doesn't mean that there wasn't a flood happening around him, and it doesn't mean that he didn't do anything. He was very, very active. He had to build the ark. Once he was in the ark, he had to feed the animals, and there was work to do, important work to do. So the question is, what is rest? And I think you may be able to add to this or to tweak it, Grant, but the best definition I can come up with lately is stillness of the soul.
That's good. I can't argue with that.
Stillness of the soul. I picture a level with a bubble. And stillness of the soul is when we can maintain that bubble between the lines regardless of what's going on around us.
Right.
And for years, I thought, well, the only way I can find spiritual rest and emotional rest and stability is to get to a place of maturity where life settles down. Yeah. And I came across a quote recently that reassured me, because it doesn't happen that way, does it?
Yeah.
This quote is an ancient one from a book on Musar, and it says, "As long as one lives a life of calmness and tranquility in the service of God, it is clear that he is remote from true service."
Very good.
In other
So
words,
true.
if you come to a place in your life where all the waters are becalmed and the waves have been stilled, there's a very good chance that you're in a coma or deeply asleep, because it's not a good place to be. And I went, oh, I was so relieved. Because we tend to think something's wrong. When the more we're seeking to mature our spirit and our soul, the crazier life can feel around us. And we almost feel more at odds with our culture, right?
Yeah, that's so true. I was just thinking while you're talking. There's a device you can buy, and it's been around for centuries, especially in the Middle East. And you know how it is when you have to carry a full coffee cup across the room. You have to be real careful not to slosh it. Well, they have this thing. It's like a chain. Suspended from the chain is a little platform, a little round platform. And if you put your coffee on that platform, you can swing that thing around all you want, but the level of the coffee stays perfectly still because the centrifugal force just keeps it still. You don't lose a drop. And they even make them where you can put 3 or 4 or 5 cups of tea or coffee, and the person bringing them can just kind of swing it, and it doesn't make any difference. And even though from the outside it looks a bit violent, if you could put cameras on each coffee cup, you'd see that the level of the liquid stays exactly level, exactly still and calm. And, if we're in Messiah, if we're truly in God's grace and are aware of that and have faith in Him, we can experience that calm, that stillness. And Noah's name spelled backwards is the word chin, which means grace. And it says that Noach found chin in the eyes of the Lord. And so when you spell his name backwards, it's grace. Forward, it's rest. But the word Noach, which means rest, it's a particular kind of rest. It's very closely attached to comfort as well, a real internal, genuine comfort. The word Nehemiah comes from the word Noach, rest. And Nahum comes from that Noach, that word rest and comfort. And many times you find this word used as God comforting His people. How does He do that? By making us still inside.
Right.
When you comfort a child, what you're trying to do is calm the storm that's going on in their emotions. And so God, through His Spirit, through His truth, He can comfort us, but it happens by Him making our faith stronger and just stilling the storm. So even though it's chaos all around you, you're in the ark, you're safe.
So let's get specific then. What does that ark, that big boat, represent?
Well, in the Parsha seasoning that you mentioned about this Torah portion, I mentioned that the dimensions of the boat are closely attached to the numerical values of the letters in God's name, Yod He Vav He. And you can think of the boat as being God.
Yeah.
You think of it as being Messiah. If you're in Messiah, all is well. If you're outside of Messiah, all bets are off.
Right.
And it's a picture of the person too. It's a picture of us when we are ordering our lives according to God's instructions. Inside this Torah portion, we see 2 huge structures being built. We see the ark, and we see the Tower of Babel. And this makes a great menorah pattern. And I encourage the listeners to do a study. Just take a sheet of paper, divide it into 2 columns, put Noah's Ark at the top of one, and Tower of Babel at the top of the other. And then start making all the comparisons you can. Because both of these were attempts for salvation. Because legend tells us that the people who built the tower, they weren't just trying to reach heaven. They were also trying to build something so if there's another flood, they can go up the tower and be above the waters. So, but we know that the ark succeeded and the tower failed. The ark was made out of obedience to God's instructions, but the tower is built in defiance of God's instructions, because it was headed by Nimrod. And it says it was done in defiance of God. It was done in the face of God. And the ark is made out of living stuff, made out of wood. But what was the tower made out of? It's made out of bricks. It's made out of dirt. And it one succeeded, one failed, and you keep going on and on and on, and make the comparisons.
One of the things that amazes me when I think about the Tower of Babel is, at first glance, it seems like it was a good thing because everybody was working in unity. They were all together, facing the same direction, doing the same thing, working for the same goal. So we would think, oh, well, that's a beautiful thing.
And there was no resistance to it.
No, nobody thought it was a bad idea.
Yeah, not like with Noah and his family building the ark.
That seemed like a
mocking
ridiculous idea. And you know that the whole time he was doing it, he had to keep reminding himself, I know what everybody is saying about what I'm doing, but I also know what God has told me.
Yeah.
And he had to choose which voice to listen to, didn't he?
Yes, and I see you have a book open there you want to read from.
Well, I read a paragraph this week from Karen Pryor's Taste of Torah. Just a really neat little book I try to read for each portion. And I'll just go ahead and read this. I think it's worth the moment that it'll take. It says, a vital lesson to be learned in this account, and we're talking about building the tower, is the understanding that while unity and community are biblical ideals blessed by God, they do carry an inherent danger. A community may come to regard itself as the purpose of its own existence, and the identities of both God and the individual become subordinated to it. This danger can be applied to any form of community, including the family, organizations, and religious congregations. If the community does not encourage individual members primarily to serve God rather than the group itself, then the moral law of God and ultimately God himself will be dispensed with. We see examples of this in lots of forms of dictatorship and so on. But here's the final paragraph. A religious community that may proclaim faith in God but compels members to submit to its commands and even to sacrifice their lives for its own power and glory become a god unto itself. And that's a lowercase g. In reality, these entities are building their own kingdom and not the kingdom of one true God.
That's true. That is such a great paragraph. You know, what you see when you compare the ark with the tower is you see what obedience to God looks like compared to what man-made religion looks like. And while you're reading that, reminded of a phrase in a commentary by Rabbi Manis Friedman, because Nimrod was he was the prime architect of the Tower of Babel and the prime mover behind it. And he says, Nimrod is the patron saint of uniformity. Because he had everybody submitted to him to do everything exactly the way he wanted. And God was not pleased with that. There was no room for individuality. And so God came down and confused their languages and scattered man across the face of the earth. Because the direction they were going was a dangerous one. They would become their own God.
Well, you know, more personally speaking, when I mentioned how I've really pursued rest, because ultimately that's what God calls us people to.
Yes.
If we think about last week's Torah portion, the very first day that Adam and Eve spent in this world was the Sabbath.
Yes.
So he was saying, more than anything, I'm calling you to live a life that understands my rest.
So everything, with all their work that he did give them to do was a work that came out of rest, not a work that just led to rest.
And I can't help but picture another boat story when the disciples were in the boat and Yeshua was sound asleep because he was at rest. He wasn't worried about the storm. And I don't think the story is teaching us not to allow a storm to get our attention or even concern us. But when they went to him and woke him, they accused him of not caring. And in my own life, Grant, that's when I start my bubble starts to float outside the lines, and I lose my peace, and I have a hard time dwelling in the rest when I start to suspect that the Lord doesn't care, or he doesn't see, or he's not involved in my life, in my circumstance. And so the key, on the other hand, to true spiritual rest is to realize that no matter when the flood waters are rising, or no matter when the storm is raging, even this is for my good.
Yeah.
If I can know that even this is for my good.
Absolutely.
And not accuse him of not caring, I can maintain rest no matter what's happening.
Yeah. Gamzu Latov. This too is for the best.
I love that. I love it, but I forget it like several times a day, and I have to choose to return to it.
Well, you remind me of the Torah portion coming up in Exodus. I think it's the second Torah portion. Don't quote me on that. But it's the Torah portion where the Israelites have left Egypt, and they're being tested, but God doesn't rebuke them or anything. And then God brings water to them from the rock. And then they say, is God among us or not?
Right.
And the next verse says, an Amalek attacked.
Yeah, that really sets us up.
It's the moment you start, that's when God got angry.
Yeah.
Is God with us or not? And boy, if you want Amalek to attack in your life, you want the flesh to rise up, what you do is start to doubt that God is with you. So if we can always, if we can always keep God standing before us, always there right in front of us, then we can't be shaken. We're unshakable.
And when you picture Noah taking his immediate family into that place of rest with him, and God sealing the door behind them, like you've always said, I have this image of it doesn't matter how deep the water is, the boat is still floating on top of it.
Yes.
Whether it's a few feet deep or a few 100 feet deep, the boat floats.
Like as though sin may abound, grace superabounds. And what's grace? Chin. That's Noah backwards. And so it doesn't make a difference how sinful the culture is around us. Stay in the boat and you float above it. And you're always going to be in the light and in the air.
I was thinking about these themes this morning in my prayer time, and I was in Psalm 116, and verse 5 says, gracious is the Lord and righteous. Yes, our God is compassionate. The Lord preserves the simple. I was brought low and he saved me. And this is the one. Verse 7 says, return to your rest, O my soul, for the Lord has dealt bountifully with you. And the reason I embraced that and just clung to that verse today is because it reminds me of the key to returning to that rest is remembering that he's gracious and compassionate.
Yes. And what does Yeshua do? He says, come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you work to do. No, I will give you rest. You'll find rest unto your souls. You'll find rest to your souls. Which reminds me of another passage. And people who are listening realize we have no idea what we're going to do when we sit down here to do this. It just kind of happens.
And we have really enjoyed getting some feedback this week. So we invite you to send us a message. And,
questions.
Or say, what in the world are you talking about?
Recommendations, corrections. Yeah. But I'm looking at Jeremiah 6:16. It says, thus says Adonai, stand by the ways and see and ask for the ancient paths. These are the paths of Torah, where the good way is, and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. So Yeshua was quoting this passage. So ask for the ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it, you will find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk in it.
We will not walk in it. The ancient paths can appear and be accused of being irrelevant, antiquated.
Or too difficult.
Replaced. What a lie.
Oh, yeah.
And
what
so isn't it amazing that we could look at the story and see compassion and grace and rest and
absolutely.
Really cool.
Oh, I'm going to shift gears if it's okay with you.
Sure.
To a theological question, which this kind of sparks because part of the ancient paths that people often want to resist are the kosher laws. And one of the things that well-meaning believers look to try to say that the kosher laws don't have any standing today is here in this Torah portion. In chapter 9, verse 3, this is after the flood and after Noah and his family have come out of the ark. And he tells them, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And so people look at that and say, see, anything that can walk or fly or crawl, we can eat it. But they fail to look at the next phrase. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, like the green herbage I have given you everything. Now here's the interesting thing. Of the green herbage, of the plants that grow out of the ground, only about 5 to 10% of those plants are edible at all. But the rest are either poisonous, or they'll make you sick, or you simply can't digest them because our digestive systems are incapable of drawing nourishment from them. So God has given us animals to eat, like he's given us the vegetation to eat, but only part of that vegetation can even be eaten. Only part of the animals can be eaten.
And so once again, we have his instructions
We have
to
his
give us life and
instructions.
to give us boundaries.
Yes. And when God gave instructions to bring the animals onto the ark 2 by 2, he says you bring 1 pair of all the unclean animals, 7 pair of all the clean animals. You know, we were down into the ark experience, which is really something to see. We were down there last year. But I was a little shocked to notice that of the clean animals, they only had 1 pair instead of 7 in the cages. I thought, they missed a little detail here. And so even in Noah's day, they understood the difference between clean animals and unclean animals. And so the clean animals are given to us as food. The unclean animals are not even considered food. So it's a very important verse there to understand in its scriptural context.
It reminds me of the story when you were a little kid and you were showing off to your friends about how you...
Are you going to embarrass me right now?
you ate poison ivy. So
the berries. Yeah, poison ivy berries.
And you thought you were so cool and it almost killed you.
Well, I was trying to be a pioneer. I was trying to be like Davy Crockett.
So not all the green things were for food.
No, they were not for food. I found that out the hard way at an early age.
Well, we only have a few minutes left before we go overtime. So is there something else you wanted to share before I share just one more thought?
Sure. You mentioned the generations from Adam to Noah, and there's 10 generations. And what's interesting is right at the end of this Torah portion, we're introduced to Abraham. And Abraham was exactly 10 generations from Noah.
Just a coincidence.
No, it's a quinky-dink, yes. But it's like you get 10 generations from Adam and you come to a new beginning. So the flood's taking place, you have 8 souls here, they're going to reproduce and fill the earth again. Then 10 generations later, you have Abraham. It's like God says, time for another new beginning. And this is not a physical new beginning, but this is a spiritual awakening, a spiritual new beginning. And everything up to the birth of Abraham covers a period of about 2,000 years. So you have the creation right on up to the birth of Abraham. And then all of a sudden the narrative, God slams on the brakes. He slows everything way down because it's like he's in a hurry to get to Abraham because this is when the real story begins.
This is all like setting the stage.
It's setting the stage, introduction, preface, introducing the actors, and then it's like Abraham's here, now let's start the story. So the real story begins with Abraham. It's a whole new beginning. So you were going to share something.
Well, years ago, we had some friends here and we were talking about the nature of clouds and the scriptural definition and examples of clouds. And I went into that conversation thinking, what does it matter? And realized by the end of it that it was super significant. And towards the end of this portion in chapter 9, God says, I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of a covenant between me and the earth. It shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth. So he will bring clouds over the earth. There will be a bow that will be seen in the cloud. Like I will bring clouds, but there'll be a rainbow in the cloud. So the cloud has a purpose.
Yes.
So the question that I tend to ask is, well, what is a cloud? And a cloud is when the sun is temporarily obscured by a storm. And during the storms of life, it's difficult to see the sun, isn't it?
It's still shining, but we just can't see it.
It's still there. And here in Ohio, unfortunately, we have a lot of cloudy days, and we forget what the sun looks like at times. But it's always there.
Only from about November to April.
That's about it. But then he provides just the exact correct situation and elements for his light, the sun, to shine through raindrops, and they become the prisms for his light to be displayed in this spectacular way.
Yes.
And what happens is we not only see the sun, but when we see a rainbow, we get to see different facets of the light. Yeah. And he shows us things about himself that we could not see if we didn't have the storm and the cloud and the obstruction of light for a while. And suddenly we look up and we see, oh, look at the rainbow. And what's so interesting about it, Grant, is throughout my life, and I'll bet our listeners can really relate to this, rainbows pop up at truly significant moments.
That's true.
And
we've seen it many times.
We've seen it so many times. It's like when I need a nudge and a promise that he is indeed a God of new beginnings, and he always sees, and even this is for my good. There will be a rainbow in the sky.
Yeah. Isn't that wonderful? That's
Isn't
amazing.
it wonderful?
And then it's so sad to see how the enemy robs us of things that are so spiritually significant, to where the rainbow then becomes a symbol for perversion
and defiance.
And defiance of God's ways.
But you know what? We take it back. And as Rabbi Hirsch said in his Komish commentary, he says, the rainbow is the eternal sign that no matter how bleak the future may seem, God will lead mankind to its eternal and ultimate goal.
Isn't that great? Amen to that. All right. Well, boy, that 30 minutes went quick, didn't it? Yeah. So anyways, just want to thank all of you for joining us, for just sitting in our dining room here and eavesdropping on Robin and I as we just talk. But
barely scratching the surface.
Barely scratching the surface.
Hopefully it creates curiosity and interest and encouragement.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a joy to talk about Torah. And, God commanded Joshua, he said, this book of the Torah shall not depart out of your mouth. And what that means is that you're always talking about it. It's always in your mouth. And it's just such a joy to discuss the truths that are found in God's eternal Torah. So we hope you've been blessed, and we look forward to speaking with you again a week from now, when we get to the Torah portion, Lech Lecha, which really begins to kick off the story of Abraham. So
the story of us.
Yes, and our story as well. So until then, we wish you shalom, and may God bless.
Bye-bye.